So Brian is about to introduce our student teams. I wanted to just make sure everybody was aware of what this challenge actually was, because I don't think I mentioned that very explicitly. What we asked was, where and how will Chicago create 126,125 affordable rental homes in Chicago in the next 5 years? That was their challenge. We asked them to please focus on supply side strategies as opposed to demand side. And we had a list of requirements you can see on the website. But I wanted to make sure everybody knew what the challenge was. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm really excited to introduce our first group. They've all come up with really interesting ideas, and I think you're all going to enjoy hearing from them. This is From Shortage to Shelter, the plan for an affordable Chicago rental market. Teammates Jeremy Endicott, Ryan McCrae, and Henry Niebuhr. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for joining us today. As you already heard, we are presenting From Shortage to Shelter, the plan for an affordable Chicago rental market. We think the question proposed by this challenge of 126,000 missing deeply affordable units, it cuts deep. The poorest are denied shelter and safety at an extreme rate. So how can we fix this in just 5 years? We need 25,000 new units pushed into affordability of the 30% AMI band every year. For scale, only 6,000 new market rate units were built in 2023, and only 687 were built using the low-income housing tax credit in 2024. We love the 5-year time limit specifically because housing delayed is housing denied. We knew this large of a gap in housing would require all hands on deck, the public and private sector, using both ideas from the supply and demand frameworks. So, our 3 big ideas today are the zoning with character policy package, to expand Chicago lot cleaning, and to expand non-HUD funding. Now, before I get into our first big idea, I need to explain something. The housing market has this mechanic called filtering, also called the moving chain. The idea is when you build a new market rate unit of housing, someone moves into that and they leave their old home behind, and then someone moves into that, and so on, leading to housing upgrades for every part of the income spectrum. This is called filtering, and the filtering rate is estimated to be about 70%. So every 10 new market rate units leads to 7 units being pushed into affordability, even at the 30% AMI band. So that said, our first idea is the zoning with character policy package. This idea came from the need to enable new market rate housing at the lowest possible price point. We needed, $0. Let's get the market to do it for us. So these 5 ideas, while they seem like a scattershot, every intervention has been proven to induce new market rate units. We get the fewest new units from ETOD, or Equitable Transit-Oriented Development, at 4,000 units over 5 years. And we get the most from 3 flats at 30,000 over 5 years. This makes sense when we look at our map because most of Chicago's residential zoning is the single-family lots that would be impacted the most by this 3-flat expansion. We also found, looking at these housing reforms, that when done together, they actually multiply each other's impact. So what we found was that when you do a lot of these together, you can expect 40% more housing on top of the induced market rate housing, but we went with a more conservative 14%. So that gives us 84,000 units over 5 years at market rate, but through filtering, 59,000. We think this represents something very beautiful and moving. This represents a small-scale builder and renovator revolution. More home choice and availability for everyone. No more lines outside open house tours, and no more bidding wars, because everyone has housing for them. This represents more power to consumers, lowering rents for everyone. And for the 30% AMI band, that's the difference between shelter or the sidewalk. Now, although this enables a ton of housing diversity, homes of all shapes and sizes, I need to outline that this does not allow for any skyscrapers in your neighborhood. The tallest reform is the transit-oriented development one, and that has a maximum building height of 47 feet. So, I'm beating around the bush. The elephant in the room is that none of this reform happens without resident buy-in and political cover. So, I go into our policy feasibility spectrum. This is a spectrum outlining realities of the housing and political spheres that make us either very pessimistic on the left or very optimistic on the right about these reforms. Things like aldermanic prerogative, things like cut the tape, which should be on the more optimism side, but wasn't put in. We think we are at a tipping point. And if the city had a referendum on our policy package, we are positive that with the right messaging, it would pass. And we ask that you only look at our neighbor, Evanston, at the recent mayoral election, which was considered to be a reform on their Envision Evanston policy package, which included some of the reforms we have today.
Thank you, Ryan. In 2007, the City of Chicago passed the Affordability Requirement Ordinance, or ARO, requiring that developers set aside 20% of new units to be marked for affordability. Since 2015, over 50,000 units have been developed in the City of Chicago, and so we would expect over 10,000 of those to be affordable. However, close to 1,600 have actually been built. And that's because of in lieu fees that developers have been able to pay to the city rather than mark those units as affordable. We recommend that the City of Chicago eliminates those in lieu fees. That will produce over 5,000 affordable units over the next 5 years. Similarly, Chicago has a number of mega projects like Lincoln Yards and the 78 that are marked to create over 7,500 affordable units. We assume that those projects are developed over the next 5 years, and that 50% of those affordable units are at 30% AMI, which would lead to over 3,600 additional affordable units.
Thank you, Jeremy. Now I'd like to talk about CHA legacy sites. Now, these used to all be public housing, and you can see that in the tall red bars on the left of these three. So, the city and CHA collectively own 270 acres in these legacy sites. Now, we propose building 4,900 LIHTC units, which 25% would be reserved for 30% AMI units, which is around 1,200 units. Now, this is important for another policy level that already exists. This would address all outstanding consent decrees, which Daniel mentioned. This would address all outstanding right to return residents. This would align with CHA's goals of complete communities. No single site would be oversaturated with 30% AMI households. And finally, while we're talking about how to build these units, we also have to talk about how we're going to subsidize the rental assistance. These are all entitled to rental assistance already through the Faircloth to RAD program. We should already utilize this program because it's designed exactly for this purpose. Now I want to talk about city-owned land. The city owns roughly 1,700 acres of vacant land. All we're proposing is 658 acres, or around 40%, to be designated in what we're calling priority zones. Now, these are going to be close to transit stops and hospitals because we really need to treat housing as healthcare. Now, whether it's city scavenger sales or vacancy taxes or the $1 lot program or even the most recent 800 property portfolio that just sold, none of these work to offload vacant land. And we critically have to ask ourselves why that is. We think the problem is polluted and contaminated lands. So we want to issue a one-time bond of $285 million to do the justice of cleaning these lands. This will reduce uncertainty with time and money, reducing the need for phase 1 and phase 2 environmental reviews, and developers and communities will literally have a clean slate to work with. Now, we need to get more creative with how we fund and subsidize these units. Housing is healthcare, and we need to look at all the marginalized communities that are really being affected by the housing crisis. Now, we've seen housing already tap into healthcare-related funds, whether that's the supportive living facilities, or it's the Medicaid 1115 waiver, or even the substance use prevention and recovery. We can do this. Now, I want to also say that Chicago's already a leader in this. If you look in the center here, this is the Foglia Residences. This is one of the first LIHTC-funded apartments in the country made for blind people. This can only happen because it's working with local service providers, local housing agencies, and using LIHTC and resources to actually build this. We need creative solutions like this to be an innovator and a leader for Chicago. So I want to leave you with our final 3 suggestions. These can be done today. 1, relax the zoning. Allow it to be easier to construct these 3 flats that Ryan was mentioning. 2nd, we need to expand the lot cleaning program. People want to build. There are people who want to build, and there are community organizations that want to provide. We just need to give them a clean slate. And finally, we need to diversify our portfolio and our reliance on HUD. We need to have a position of resilience and not a position of reliance. And with that, I'd like to conclude. Questions?
So we have 5 minutes of Q&A, and the questions are strictly going to come from the jurors. I guess I will start since I'm holding the microphone. Thank you so much. My question is, how did you get to the $285 million figure for the lot remediation?
Sure. Let me get to that slide. So we spoke to 3 different developers who have actually built LIHTC-funded apartments on the south and west sides, and we asked to receive their pro formas to understand what the actual costs were to remediate these sites. On average, it costs around $54,000 to clean a regular Chicago lot. Now, if you think about that, if you want to build a $100,000 condo to sell to someone, that's more than half the price to do so. And so, long story short, we got these from real apartment projects.
This is working. I'm curious, actually, also about this piece. So once the lots are cleaned, are there particular mechanisms you see as particularly promising for conveying them to private developers or to?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we don't envision a lot of this to be LIHTC. I do have a table here that shows kind of how we envision to use the allocated, both IDA and city allocated LIHTC. So you can see on the bottom, there are some that we would want to be allocated for these lots, but a lot of it would be community allocation. We would say, let's work with community organizers already in the area, whether like, in Pilsen or in Little Village, we could look at the Resurrection Project. They would be a perfect example of, oh, well, here's a lot of clean lots, and you're already doing this work, so we can reduce the costs.
Can you go back to the map that shows the distribution of the lands that you'll be targeting? Apparently, we all like this map. This is fun. So I see a lot of concentration of infill on the south and west sides, which has historically been our disinvested neighborhoods. Have you given any thought, though, to what does that do to community when you are targeting that many units in those neighborhoods? Is there a partnership you've established? What else? Is there anything else that needs to happen with those buildings? What's the community impact?
So we thought a lot about what it means to deluge any area of any place with housing. And I think we struggled with this a lot because housing is just one part of this issue. We need to focus on healthcare and education. So we recognize that there's all that. We believe that there's community organizations in place that can help provide services. But in terms of the actual building housing, we would just rely on the current community developers. That helps.
Any follow-up? My question goes, I thought it was great the way you introduced the concept of filtering, and then there was a slide up towards the beginning that kind of, you made some assumptions about how many units you would get based on some assumptions about filtering, and I would just like to hear that again, how you got to the 70% again. Could you just go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So this slide, possibly more than any other slide in our presentation, is the one that's going to have the longest citation page. This probably represents 10 to 15 different research papers. The filtering one was a mix between two different papers, and 70% was just the happy medium. For a little further explanation on the filtering, it's 70% because some people are like moving out of their parents' house, so there is no unit that is freed by new market rate. Some of it is people upgrading to an extra bedroom, or just not leaving their old home behind. That's why it's not 100%.
Where did you get the term zoning with character? I haven't really heard that before. Often character can be a loaded term when you start talking about neighborhood character. So I wondered where you got that.
I came up with it. The character conversation is absolutely one we wanted to be in front of. This policy package needs to be marketed with the perspective of your neighborhoods matter, there are reasons why they are currently valuable, and we don't want to change that. This is, in a way, a broad upzoning of the entire city, so that no one specific area feels the pressure to change. We personally did not want to point out any character-defining reforms like setback. That is not one of our reforms, so the character feel could be preserved. So we called it zoning with character.
How does parking reform get you 12,618 units?
That's a great question. Yeah. So parking spaces are often just a financial burden on new housing that, as the demographics of Chicago change, people aren't really looking for. It's preventing a lot of people from building the houses that they want by requiring parking. So when you get rid of parking, you make it cheaper just because you don't have to build a garage. You don't have to build the driveway. And so it enables more ADUs, and that gets into the multiplicative nature of it.
I believe I read somewhere a third of Chicagoans do not have a car.
Let's go back to the in lieu of fees, right? That's our favorite. So if you're removing the in lieu of fees and their folks are then required to do the regulated 20% units, those dollars that typically are routed, what's the impact of not having those dollars?
Yeah, a lot of those dollars currently go to pilot programs that the city implements. We believe that this would be more impactful to actually generate housing than those pilot programs. And we believe even, I thought you were going to ask, what if this just tanks supply? Well, even if 50% of supply happens, that would be triple the amount of ARO units that have actually been built.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to hear from our second group, reclaiming space using public land and vacancy taxes to build and revitalize Chicago's neighborhoods. Team members Adam Jensen, Kelly Lynch, and Elena Whiteman.
appendix slides. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Our proposal is entitled Reclaiming Space, Using Public Land and Vacancy Taxes to Revitalize Chicago's Neighborhoods. I live across the street from the abandoned Fisk Elementary School. The empty site is often unused, only serving as overflow parking for university events. Rather than homes, parks, or gardens occupying that space, this vacant land is a barrier separating neighbors from neighbors. Many affordable housing initiatives forget one simple truth. Houses must also be homes. This is why we seek to address vacancy through its two means, empty lots and unoccupied units, by reimagining development as community building. We aim to increase the quantity of low-income homes while also fostering thriving communities.
As Elena mentioned, our first guiding principle was this focus on vacancy. But from there, we settled on 3 additional principles with a focus on feasibility in the eyes of voters, implementers, and community stakeholders. We wanted to make sure that we found a solution that would engage with community organizations, that our developments would fit with their surroundings, and that we could make use of city-owned land. From these principles, we sought out solutions that would work at the community or the local level rather than a blanket citywide solution that couldn't be adapted for local contexts. We were inspired by Seattle's urban and neighborhood centers, which successfully created affordable housing around narrow development corridors in Seattle, and then wanted to adapt that small-scale model to Chicago. So we're proposing the novel Anchor Zones model based on these principles and this inspiration. We believe that this is an approachable solution that would excite and involve stakeholders, and then could be scaled across the city. We started with the selection of anchor sites, large publicly owned land like old schools or libraries that could be redeveloped into a community hub that could host community events, social services, as well as housing. Then we proposed 3 interventions in the anchor zone around the anchor site, first being requests for proposal and construction assistance for city-owned vacant land, as well as incentives for private development of vacant land, and finally targeted upzoning that keeps with the roofline of the community that exists, but also builds some capacity for additional rental unit development. You can see at right, these overlapping circles are where we envision anchor zones being. We set a 1/4 mile radius around the anchor site to make sure that we were prioritizing development in places that had access to this new community hub, and also used the standard 1/2 mile walking distance radius from an L station to make sure that we were building units that had transit access to the rest of the city. So though the anchor zone model operates at a small scale and draws its strengths from this local scale, we believe that this approach, with its community engagement and its adaptability to local contexts, has the potential to scale across Chicago. At left, you can see anchor site prospects, which often overlap with areas of historic disinvestment and where we see vacancy law violations, which we see as an indicator for demand for revitalization. And then at right, you see what happens when we apply the anchor zone model across the city of Chicago. Development is concentrated in the south and west side, since that's where vacant properties are most common, but anchor zones could be applied across the city. Now, to give you a picture of what this housing will actually look like, we've gathered some pictures from 2 case studies that feature in our written proposal, the Paderewski and Fisk School anchor sites. You can see that these neighborhoods often have 2 and 3 flats existing already, and we don't want to depart so drastically from that roof line. You can also see examples of city-owned vacant lots that we would want to develop that are zoned for and the right lot size for additional 2 and 3 flats. We know that the city has shown interest and has a financial stake in this type of new development, as seen at this rendering on the right, which is an infill development 3-flat that's currently under contract as part of the city's Missing Middle initiative, and demonstrates that the city is interested in this type of infill development that we're proposing.
We next want to talk about funding. Our primary funding mechanism for this program will be a vacancy tax. Vacancy taxes will apply to units that have been vacant, not abandoned, for 180 days or more in a year. By adding a tax to these vacant properties, we can create a pool of money that will also finance the construction of extremely low-income housing. Even if we had a meager tax of just $500 per unit per year with an extremely conservative compliance rate of about 85%, that tax would raise over $30 million in a year. And if we chose to follow in the footsteps of places like California, we could increase that tax to be roughly the equivalent of 1 month's rent per year per unit. This would raise between $150 and $200 million a year. Finally, further expansions of the tax could scale payments to time. The longer a landlord leaves a unit vacant, the more they have to pay. Thus, we create a system where 1, we collect revenues from taxes to build more affordable housing, and 2, we significantly reduced rents, as now we've drastically increased the supply of housing as landlords seek to fill this housing in order to avoid these vacancy taxes. If this vacancy tax is successful, we propose expansions to the policy into storefronts. Mayor Johnson recently created and expanded a program in order to actually categorize and quantify these vacant storefronts. And currently, vacant property owners use legal tax relief in order to get out of paying taxes. Thus, we seek to eliminate that program and further implement vacancy taxes to ensure that we also don't have vacant storefronts. We also recognize, however, that vacancy taxes are likely not enough to fund our plan alone. Thus, we advocate for community and local-based incentives that encourage private and community developers to actually develop this extremely low-income housing. This includes expanding programs like the Chicago Community Loan Fund, which provides avenues for flexible and affordable loans. We also plan to increase low-income housing tax credits, which provide a reduction in the taxable income for developers. And finally, we propose an expansion into other neighborhoods of programs like the Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance, which allocates certain city-owned vacant lots for affordable housing. Expanding this program is crucial to ensure that we have enough space and incentives to develop this housing.
And now that we've gone over our funding mechanism and anchor zone approach to development, we can discuss stakeholder engagement in more depth. First, we'll need to attract voters to ensure the vacancy tax plan is approved by county referendum. An efficient strategy for voter engagement would entail appealing to 1, those who seek affordable housing, 2, the people within communities targeted for development, and 3, the people most likely to vote on Cook County tax policy. And these groups might not always overlap. In fact, a recent property tax referendum reported highest voter turnout from affluent homeowners in the suburbs. Therefore, our proposal has to reach these suburban homeowners and ensure they understand how our proposal's positive social and economic implications can extend beyond city limits. We, of course, will also conduct voter outreach and registration efforts within the city to gain support from those who are interested in this plan but may not have a history of voting. If the tax policy is approved, we'll move on to the implementation stage of the proposal. Some stakeholders involved in the developmental process would be the city's Department of Planning and Development, as well as the Department of Finance, who would respond to property owners with vacancies. Under the anchor zone model, community organizations and businesses will be the primary representatives of residential interests, making sure that our idea for development actually aligns with what the community wants. Now, you might be wondering, what would engaging the community look like through this anchor zone model? These zones, we hope, will bridge the gap between the new development and the communities it's taking place in by providing space for housing, social resources, perhaps one day commerce, near existing transit stations. We can look at 2 case sites to see how this would play out. For instance, in Little Village, we've identified the former Paderewski Elementary School as a suitable anchor site after its closing. Here, we would focus on partnering with existing organizations centered around affordable housing, especially those that can connect with Spanish speakers. I've identified a few here that would perhaps organize at the anchor site and engage with new residents in the zone. Another strong example for a potential anchor site would be the now closed Fisk Elementary School in Woodlawn. Woodlawn East Community and Neighbors has a nonprofit organization has expressed a desire to engage in a collaborative community process to bring vacant land to productive use, which would align perfectly with our goals. We hope to learn about potential developers, ideas for grassroots organization, and opportunities for growth directly from organizations like We Can. Ultimately, we want to ensure that this new development fits within each community's context rather than disrupting it. And on that note, I want to return your attention to our long-term forecast map, which displays where exactly these 126,000 units could go. Through our affordable housing proposal, we seek to build not just houses, but homes and strong communities throughout the city of Chicago. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I have a question about the anchor zones. Who determines where and what an anchor zone is, and how many do you envision that you would need?
Yeah, so as these were originally modeled after the Seattle urban and community zones, that is a process that takes place on the city side. Just as also in the city of Chicago, the city has been responsible for choosing places that the Missing Middle initiative is going to take place. The city knows which of its vacant properties that it owns, like these schools, might be best primed for anchor zone to become an anchor site or to become an anchor zone, and we foresee them leading the charge on choosing those sites. That being said, because we're committed to community engagement and engaging with community organizations, we see a path where those organizations could also pitch themselves to the city to make a site within their community into an anchor site. So although we originally started with these two examples of Paderewski and Fisk, we already know that the number of old schools in and of themselves already is over a dozen, and we also foresee potentially community centers, churches, libraries, and other potential private sites being possible for the next round of anchor site development.
I would just like to add on to Adam's response and say that having worked not in housing but with CPS on the city side of things, I've experienced some of the process of consulting and making sure that we do stakeholder engagement correctly. And I think that's something this plan really emphasizes, is that the city would be working with community organizations throughout the whole process, even if they are the final selectors for what would be these anchor sites. And what drew us to these closed schools initially is the idea that this is the type of disinvestment that affected these neighborhoods to begin with. And that's why we're seeing all of these vacancies surrounding the schools. So if the city were to turn them into community centers or places of housing, that would be a way of giving back to the community in a way that making up for their past actions.
Quick follow-up question. Have you given any thought to the difficulty involved in trying to determine a vacant unit? Because, somebody goes on vacation 6 months, right? Is that a vacant unit?
Yeah, so the U.S. Census actually tracks the amount of vacant units. So while there's some conjecture about how there's 300 or 400,000 vacant units in Chicago, the U.S. Census actually goes in and double checks those numbers. And the numbers that they came out with were roughly 100,000 vacant units in Chicago per year.
But might it be difficult to get a list of addresses? I mean, the census doesn't do that kind of level of identification. I mean, you need to really send these property owners a tax bill, right? Did you have any thought about that?
I mean, the city has a very robust system for tax payment, right? We saw that there's a very high compliance rate with the actual payment of taxes. And so being able to do that mailer outreach and make sure that property owners know that if they have left vacant units, that they will be taxed with our specific vacancy tax is really important to us. And do want to go ahead and share about storefronts?
And something else that we considered during this process was the idea that storefronts are currently sitting vacant in certain neighborhoods, and the store owners are receiving tax credits for them. So now the city is going through initiatives to track those storefronts and make sure that the owners are complying with city regulation and hoping to one day fill those storefronts again. I think we would apply some of that same process to this in order to make sure that these property owners are maintaining their units rather than just leaving them vacant for long periods of time.
Good job. Question about our suburban taxpayers. So there seems to be within the city that a lot of the vacants seem to actually be owned by a lot of our residents in those suburbs. So when you talked about your approach, what's the messaging to our suburban taxpayers to say, hey, by the way, you're going to have to pay more if you don't actually put someone in that property?
So this was something I thought about a lot while formatting that slide, because there is obviously a disparity between who we're attempting to serve here and who's actually voting on this issue. But I think a lot of the rhetoric surrounding, so we would tap into some of the rhetoric that is used for this approach to storefronts currently, the idea that we don't want anyone getting off easy. I think that would be that would be an approach to make sure that people in the suburbs who perhaps own these properties but aren't keeping them up, there's other people in the suburbs who feel, I don't want my property taxes messed up because somebody else isn't doing what they said they were going to do. And second, I think something that's really important to this plan is that while we're concentrating on building equity within the south and west sides, it's also throughout the city, and thus in the suburbs too. The more people we have living in the city, the better the economy is, and that will extend beyond city limits. And I think the idea is just we want to show that this will have a positive impact everywhere, so everyone needs to buy in. And hopefully that would be a good approach for our suburban friends.
Thank you. I also have a question about the vacancy tax. Stipulating a bunch of people would pay it, but imagine, given the volume of vacant properties, that some number of owners, maybe especially folks who live out of the city or even out of state, are just going to walk away from their properties. What's the plan for those buildings?
Yeah, I think we talked about that a lot. And I think the important part of the vacancy tax is that it's doing two things. Either one, it's raising that revenue, or two, it's creating new space because people either choose to walk away or don't want to pay that vacancy tax. And so I think in that scenario, we essentially say, hey, you walked away, and we take that and we incorporate it and fold it into our practice to make sure that we are still meeting the amount of units that we need to meet.
Thank you. I would love to hear a little bit more about, I know the vacancy tax is your primary source, but you did have a slide where you had a couple other ideas. Can you just talk about those a little bit more? And the one about low-income housing tax credits.
Yeah, so I think that part of our policy, right, vacancy taxes will raise a significant amount of revenue, but we also recognize the fact that right now the economic incentives to actually build this low-income housing are very skewed, right? Like, we're trying to basically make sure that we create incentives to make sure that developers want to actually develop this housing. And so I think that especially focusing on these community banks and low-interest loans and making sure that we are basically removing as many financial barriers as possible for developers is crucial. And I think especially for the low-income housing tax credits, the unique thing about that is that it's basically giving that tax incentive. And so it's actually, in our research, a better tax incentive and a better method to make sure that we're actually able to construct the amount of units that we need to.
I would also just add investment in organizations like the Woodlawn Housing Preservation Ordinance or the Community Loan Fund matches the ethos of our proposal, and that it's very committed to community stakeholder engagement, and that we believe that that makes it more popular and more scalable as well.
Thank you very much. All right, last but certainly not least, we have our final group, Reclaim, Reform, Rehouse, the 3 R's for affordable housing is their presentation. Team members Prabdeen Kaur, Sidha Katal, Julian Huang, and Jiaoyu Zhao.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we all of us know, about this issue and why do we need to address this? But the question is where we are gonna have these houses and how we are gonna get this number all together. And here are group number 3 proposing our solution: reclaim, reform, rehouse, the 3 R's of affordable housing. How we are gonna do this? What's our idea of it? to address this solution, we have thought about like some immediate solution to address it and like a long-term solution. Like, yeah. So, Shy Housing Hub acts as like an immediate solution to address a current and vacant infrastructure that we have, that is like a vacant apartments in Chicago. To bring those into like a market, we have built a centralized market platform owned by government and crowdsourced. I'll explain about this in detail in the upcoming slides. The second initiative we have is like Unified Housing Initiative, which address like long-term sustainable initiative, that is like building new houses on vacant land and have upzoning in near transit area, that is like a half a mile near transit, where we have like a single family housing zone to build 2 to 6 units in that area. From Shy Housing Hub, we are able to like unlock 20,000 affordable units. From transit-oriented upzoning, we are able to have 117,000 affordable units, and from building on vacant land, we are able to like unlock 35,000 affordable units. And all in coming together by this policy, by implementing this solution, we will have like 172,000 affordable units in city of Chicago. So moving to like our first solution, that is Shy Housing Hub. Like as we have heard from the second group, like we have like a lot of vacant apartments in city of Chicago. At the same time, like there is a concept of like vacancy tax. So we have made mandatory for landlords who has kept their apartment vacant for like more than 5 years to register on this platform. This will act as a like extension to like current platform, that is Sheep Block Builder, which is owned by City of Chicago, but which is only for the vacant land. So this extension includes the private properties listed on the government platform, which gives trust in like tenants to like register, like look out the properties in this area. While as we know, like we have very mandatory on like listing on this platform, but like why would someone list on this platform instead of like going on Zillow or like any other platform? So like we are providing rehab incentive, rehab grants, then fast track conversion rate. At the same time, like tax abatement to the people who are going to register on this platform. And recent data, that is like US Census of like 2024, has given us like there are like 126,000 current vacant apartment in city of Chicago, but like out of those only 64,000 are vacant and like are truly vacant for like other reasons that are like currently being renovated or like needs repair. But like using our grants and like fast conversion rate, we can bring those units back into the market, and like we are offering this place which acts as like a marketplace for both tenants and landlords. We also provide legal support to have like any dispute issues, like if there is like any confusion or like any legal support that is needed by both the landlords or tenants, we are supporting that. At the same time, like we are just also providing incentive. If you're offering like a more than 3-month long lease to like any tenant, then you will also get eligible for like more such incentives. This also makes the place more affordable because like government is funding you to repair your own apartment and just list on this platform. So overall by this framework, we'll able to like achieve 20,000 plus affordable units in Chicago, which are already existing, and like this can give us like a short-term yet sustainable solution. I'll pass to Julian to explain our next.
Thanks, Sudha. The first part of our Unified Housing Initiative targets the fact that Chicago currently has an immense amount of parcels sitting idle or unused. We target 3 forms of these vacant and unused parcels. The first are city-owned properties, of which the city currently has acquired 18,000 through a variety of channels. We intend to transfer these to nonprofit builders, community land trusts, and private developers committed to affordability. The second form of vacant land we are targeting are currently private, unused parcels. How do we incentivize developers to build on these? By targeting the reasons why developers currently aren't building. Through initiatives such as rehab grants, tax abatements, public-private partnerships, reduce fast-track permitting, and overall reduction of the bureaucratic process that makes it easier and supports developers where they already have the incentive to build in these places. The last form of vacant land we're targeting are vacant buildings such as warehouses and abandoned warehouses in schools, where we think have a lot of potential for adaptive reuse through initiatives such as rehab grants. Through these three different land types, we project that we can create 35,000 new affordable units through this initiative. The second part of our unified housing initiative is a form of smart upzoning, where Chicago currently can support so much more density than it currently has. Right now, 37% of land within a half-mile radius of a CTA station is zoned for single-family housing. The first phase of this proposal is to upzone 41,000 of these parcels located near urban assets such as CTA stations and pedestrian corridors to create density where it belongs. In addition to this, we will create density bonuses. So the baseline for transit-oriented development will allow developers to build 6 to 12 units in these areas, with the density bonuses incentivizing affordability, meaning that they can produce more units in these areas where if they set a certain side amount for affordable housing. Next, in the second phase, we will allow communities to take the initiative, where communities can voluntarily adopt zoning overlays. And third, we will consider, based on the success of the first two phases, a citywide expansion of 3 flats as a baseline, where we've seen successful precedent for this implemented in Minneapolis. Altogether, we envision that this will create 117,000 new affordable units. We're committed to equity and sustainable financing, where we want to balance developer incentives such that when they build new units, they actually make a profit from such units, in addition to ensuring that they are building enough affordable units. How do we do this? Well, we set aside 50% of units to be market rate. We ensure that there are 20% of units that are zero profit, or ones that are under a certain bar of affordability, in order to ensure that we balance long-term sustainability for developers, ensuring that they continue to make profit from these buildings and are incentivized to build in the first place. Another side effect of this is that this actually increases economic diversity in the new units that we create, where we know that by having a variety of economic classes or different levels of AMI together, this can lead to social mobility, increased cohesion within neighborhoods. And another thing that we thought deeply about was how to ensure community buy-in and engagement. We want residents to not just view this as new housing, but homes that they can proudly welcome to their neighborhoods. We want to build the missing middle, diverse, attractive, human-scale development that aligns with form-based design principles, ones with friendly frontage, visible green space, and ones that align with the neighborhood architectural style. How do we do this? We envision implementing this through community design workshops, pre-approved architectural plans, which allow for streamlining of the bureaucratic process while allowing for community engagement and allow residents to shape the buildings that are coming into neighborhoods. We've also considered various challenges such as funding vulnerability, political and community pushback, and technical issues with accessing the website. A lot of government websites are currently very clunky, and we think that there's so much more room for improvement and fast feedback loops, where if we streamline the process of interfacing with the government, this will lead to a lot more accessibility for people who are currently limited by their capacity to interact with the government, small businesses who are real estate agents who would want to put their units onto Shy Housing Hub. We've also carefully thought out the financial model, and a brief summary of our financial model would be one where we initially kickstart this sort of program with public funding, but overall gradually shifted out to ensure that developer incentives and private funding are the ones that are keeping this program in the long term sustainable. The solutions are clear: upzoning, building on vacant land, and more. But our program specifically provides a way to implement this in a way where all of the actors have incentives aligned to participate in this initiative, and through data-backed proposals, policy proposals, and community engagement. Through all of our proposals, as seen here, we estimate that more than 170,000 affordable units can be created, far more than the number 126,000 that are needed. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm curious, in the financial modeling, did you have thoughts about particularly where the public sector dollars are coming from?
Yes. So we looked at a lot of proposals that were already existing in the market, and we came up with a few actors who are including the people who are currently landowners and who already have properties, people who are already listed on the Chai Housing Hub. We looked at those potential stakeholders to be a part of our initial project. So those are the players that we're looking at.
Another precedent we saw was Chicago's Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Program, which one signals a clear source of funding, but also two signals interest in the city for funding these sorts of transit-oriented development program, and where they're currently providing grants to build equitable new buildings located close to CTA stations.
Thanks so much. Can you tell me what do you think is the reason that there's so much private unused land in Chicago?
Yeah, I think both of the other groups have done an excellent job targeting this. We think it's a mix of factors regarding probably decontamination efforts, like just a lack of profitability, and we think that what would truly kickstart long-term development would be initial. One thing that I forgot to mention is that when calculating the units for vacant land, we only considered parcels within a half-mile of CTA stations. So all of our proposal is targeted around urban assets and transit. But we think that just having an initial government kickstart through the various initiatives we propose would lead to long-term, would lead to long-term profitability where you develop these neighborhoods. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah.
So you free up the vacant lots, and then people have to build on them. And do you have thoughts about where they get that capital to build?
The capital that we're looking at is their existing funds that we have. There are several programs that the government runs to support these kinds of initiatives. So what we want in our proposal is to tie all of these together so that people who are willing to offer the funds also have access. And the problem is that we are offering the funds, and there are people who are wanting the funds, but there is no a matching record or a mechanism that can put all of those together. And we want to be the platform that supports that, because I think that matchmaking is really important for us to focus upon, and would really be supportive of that on our platform.
Do you have any sense of how long it would take to create that platform, the first part of the matchmaking platform?
I think when we look at technology, seeing the kind of advancements that we have had, I don't see more than a 3-month pipeline to just create that website. I think the emphasis has to be on how we market it, how we also reach out to the various people who are already are willing to have those their homes listed on that platform. Just to market it in a way that supports very different communities from very different backgrounds is it's going to be the game changer. I'm sure the government has already put in a lot of effort and a lot of initiative towards doing this, but I think there is a pushback from stakeholders because they don't see an incentive towards doing it. They don't have the knowledge about doing it. So I think ticking off those boxes would be really important and essential for our platform.
components to your funding structure is philanthropy. What is the WIFM? What's driving the philanthropy to give to this project?
I think why we included them was because there have always been people who are interested to make a difference beyond just the CSR initiatives that we see companies taking over. So, I've spoken to a lot of people who have, I've had access to people who are from various backgrounds. They also want to give back and be a part of the problem-solving game that Chicago is currently facing. So for getting a buy-in from them would be, I think they're really interested in it, and that is one of the stakeholders that we have never kind of envisioned or we have never taken into consideration while we're looking at how we want to incentivize different stakeholders. So yes, I think getting a buy-in from them would be helpful for us.
And then unrelated, I've seen the tool of fast tracking a lot today. Have you thought about, or how would you solve for the unintended costs of fast tracking processes through city government?
Could you be more specific? What was fast tracking cost?
So those are city employees laughing. So, for example, if you're looking for your permit to be approved, right, or you need that inspection to happen, if we're fast tracking, that means something's getting pushed, right, to move that one to the front of the line, which adds work and stall time for other people, right? So, have we thought about how we would solve for that, or is there an extra fee somewhere? How do we solve for that so we don't have a revolt?
Okay, so why we come up with the fast tracking solution is when I was taking this urban economic development class, the main concern was of every single stakeholder is there is a long bureaucratic process. So we don't want to get into it. I don't want to be part of this solution. I do understand where you're coming from, but I don't want to be part of solution because the capital I have, it has some cost. Until the time I completed my whole procedure, I'm still already in the loss. So we need this fast tracking solution to tackle these bureaucratic problems. At the same time, I get it, you're saying, there might be some unintended consequences. If we fasten the solution process, then we are just missing out on some details. But at the same time, we are also providing legal support to both tenants and landlords. So if you're missing out something in the first procedure and you have some disputes, we are ready to solve those again. So, as you mentioned, yes, there is a cost for fast tracking, but looking at the cost of capital, it's worth paying.
Okay. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. We are going to take another quick, short coffee break, human break. So please, there's more coffee in the back. Enjoy yourselves, and I'll call you back shortly for our keynote speaker. Thank you.